Why do some bassists in metal get so much hate? Let's take a few of the most noticeable ones, find out why, and see if it's deserved. Before we get into it, please take a quick minute, like, subscribe, and share this video if you think it's cool, and I'd love to have more people come in on the discussion and bring up some people that haven't been on this list. So with that out of the way, let's get to it. Bassist number 1, Jason Newsted. And probably pretty obvious why Jason gets so much of the hate that I think is more of a thing in the past for him. Early on, Jason was a member of the band Flotsam and Jetsam before he joined Metallica. He was kind of seen as the golden boy. He was really well known in the metal scene. Everybody would point to his amazing line on like Hammerhead or songs like that, and he was seen as a really promising up-and-coming bass player. Then he joined Metallica. And then this is when everything seems to kick off. A lot of the criticisms that Jason got were that he wasn't basically Cliff Burton. That wasn't just from his band, who apparently were pretty punishing to him, but a lot of fans would go after him for being a pick player, which I think only had to do with the fact that Cliff was a fingerstyle player, and that Jason's style was a bit more guitar-ish, meaning that he would ride the riff a little more closely than maybe Cliff Burton would have done, and that his tone was somewhat different and had more of a guitarish edge to it, partially because of the pick playing. Now, I think the thing that really kind of proves that just him being in Cliff Burton's shadow was what caused this was after he left Metallica, he kind of disappeared for a little while, went off the radar, can't imagine why. But now that he seems to have resurfaced and he's been doing projects and gigs, all of a sudden he seems to be back in favor. A lot of people are talking about him lately more like he's kind of a great bass player and that, all along they were into him and everything, which I don't think is honest on a lot of people's part. But it seems like the hazing section of Jason Newsted kind of went by. So that's a lesson for a lot of musicians. If you're really getting kicked in the face, sometimes it's just longevity. Maybe you got the eye of the hate community on you for a little bit, and you just have to ride it out because it's not always justified, or they've just decided you're the one that's going to take it more than anyone else. So you just have to hang in there. Bassist number 2, Ian Hill of Judas Priest. Being one of the only founding members left outside of Rob Halford and the on-again, off-again condition with Glenn Tipton and his illness, Ian's been around since the very beginning. And I didn't hear a lot of problems with him early on. It seemed to be later, as metal got a little bit more technical or proficient, that he kind of got a reputation for being what they would call a one-note wonder, or somebody that just played really simple, root-based bass lines. And it didn't really help that he's usually really low in the mix. So even if he was doing something, a lot of times you may not be able to pick it out. It also doesn't help that he's not only lost in the mix a lot of times on the albums, so if he were doing something, you probably wouldn't notice to begin with. And then second, he's had to play underneath of and be support for two of the most legendary metal guitarists in a team that we've ever seen. Tipton and Downing were pretty much the instrumental focus of the band, and Ian Hill and their original drummer up till Scott Travis really kind of played more of a backbeat style of things, so they were kind of marked off as people who couldn't play rather than maybe people who could play but just played what was appropriate or what the band had decided was the role of the rhythm section. He's been around for ages, and the strange thing is a lot of really high-profile other metal bassists claim him as a fantastic bassist and an influence. Even recently, guys like Dave Ellefson from Megadeth have kind of confounded their Instagram and Twitter audience by saying that Ian Hill was fantastic, and people were just going, how do you figure? So maybe there's something a little bit more to it than what we're seeing, or maybe he just knows the accomplishment of somebody who's been able to lay it down for this long and keep going. But that seems to be really the root of it, is that people are looking for technical proficiency in metal a lot, and Ian's just hasn't shown that much of it. Not that he isn't capable of it, we just don't know. And again, being lost in the mix a lot of times, it's almost the old thing of if you can't hear him, then you can't judge him. So he gets a lot of hate and kind of shoved into the background. He's also, speaking of in the background, not a real major presence on stage. So he's not flashy in his parts, in the volume of his parts on the album, or in his stage presence. So he's seen as almost an unnecessary part. So that seems to be all the parts of the hatred there. Maybe it's deserved, maybe not. I guess it depends on your perspective about what the bass role in Judas Priest should be. Bassist number 3, Fieldy from Korn. Fieldy gets it from a couple different directions, not all just having to do with his bass playing. One of the initial things that I heard the most about Fieldy, and still kind of hear to this day, is people that attack his tone. His tone is incredibly scooped, meaning that there's no center frequencies or things that really stand out as far as the central part of his sound. It's all super low end and then a very clicky high end that almost sounds like the tap on a bass drum. A lot of people really don't like that sound, and they've criticized him for it endlessly, and also say that it doesn't contribute well to the music, that it's a bad tone, especially for his style of playing, which has a lot of slap bass in it. Then speaking of slap bass, especially when Korn got started and Fieldy started showing off his slap style inside of metal, slap was seen as kind of a gimmick. And a lot of players just write off someone doing slap inside of metal as being just another Chili Peppers, Faith No More kind of novelty act. Not that those bands are, but people who would criticize it look at them that way. And that because he wasn't doing anything really heavy solo-wise, even like Flea or someone would do, that he was just riding on some kind of novelty and was to be written off. The other part is that he didn't seem to fit into the band as much visually as the other members or in his overall vibe. The other members seem to come from a very nu metal kind of thing. They have dreads, or they dress kind of metal. They have that aesthetic to them. Whereas Fieldy very much more had kind of a almost East LA cholo kind of thing going on, a lot of sports jerseys, that kind of thing. And he presented himself very much as kind of a gangsta type of style, which really wasn't the approach of the rest of the band. And then he also got a lot of bad press coverage when it was dug up that he didn't come from a tough neighborhood. He actually went, I think, to a Catholic school or something like that. So he was kind of looked on as a gimmick all the way around, that he was pretending to be hard when he wasn't, and that he was adopting this gimmicky style that was just not respectable, and that he didn't really contribute that much to the music, along with having a really bad bass tone. So I think Fieldy is really one of those love him or hate him type of things. If you identify with that kind of visual presentation and you just really dig that sound, then you don't have a problem with him. If you think his sound is horrible, or it bothers you hearing that click all the time, and you don't like his presentation or think it's fake, then you're going to write him off. So I think he suffered on a lot of different ends there. And I haven't really seen it let up. In a lot of forums, I still see Fieldy take a lot of heat. So maybe he's still in that hater's arc. Who knows? Maybe down the road someday we'll look back like we have on some of the other players in this and go, oh, maybe he wasn't that bad. What do you think? Hit me up in the comments on that one. Last on our list, Robert Trujillo. What a coincidence, another Metallica bass player. He has a few things in common with Fieldy that I think is some of the reason he takes some heat. I find it interesting that although Trujillo is closer to Cliff Burton than, say, Newsted would be, in that he's a fingerstyle player, he tends to play things that aren't as conventional in metal, or tries to, push the boundary a little bit. And he comes from a non-conventional school, kind of like Burton did. He does come from a thing where he was in Suicidal Tendencies, Infectious Grooves, and he had much more of a funk background. He also was a big slap player before Metallica and seemed to carry that weight into Metallica, and that's where some of the heat comes from, too. He's seen as someone who came from a background that wasn't metal and worked a lot more in kind of funk and, again, the Red Hot Chili Pepper background, that type of thing, or things that were seen as gimmicks, like the slap bass, just like Fieldy did. The other, just like Fieldy, is that his presentation is a little different. He has more of a sporty kind of vibe that's different from the other members of Metallica. There's a lot of similarities in the reasons why him and Fieldy get a lot of heat. And the other is, again, being lost in the mix a lot of times. You can't pick him out a lot. And that he doesn't seem to be contributing that much because you can't really hear him a lot of the times. The times that I have heard him, especially on the last album, he's been more prominent in Metallica. He definitely has a much more Cliff Burton style of tone. It's a very warm, kind of overdriven tone. I find it kind of interesting because, again, a lot of people kind of want to push him away, mostly because of his bass playing before Metallica. And they're not listening maybe to the point where he's closer to Cliff than Newsted was. A lot of the guys now are giving him heat, saying that Newsted was better. So you can't quite figure some of this stuff out. It's really kind of ironic that now so many of the people who are on the hate Newsted wagon are now seeing him in a better light and heaping a lot of the hate onto Trujillo. So it is kind of funny, too, that you see some similarities, at least across three of the bassists. Ian Hill seems to be off on his own in the type of hate that he gets, except for being low in the mix and things. But when you look at Fieldy having the image thing, same thing with Robert Trujillo, Trujillo having to stand in the legacy of Metallica and having a different style and background is the same thing that Newsted did. And then it's almost the exact opposite of Newsted's arc. Newsted was known for being really cool and people liked him. And then he joined Metallica and got a lot of hate. And then went back out and seems to have recovered the reputation and started getting accolades. Now you have Trujillo, who people aren't willing to give him maybe as much respect because of his past work that they don't think fits in Metallica. And I don't know if they're afraid he's going to bring it out or start doing some slap bass or what. But it's taken a while, and it seems like some of it's smoothed out with him a bit, but I know a lot of people who still really don't like him. So let me ask you that question and hit that up in the comments. For the people who either haven't liked Trujillo or Newsted, what bass players do you think would have been the right replacement for Metallica? What guys on the scene do you think would be the fit if Trujillo wound up leaving? That seems like a really interesting question because, again, a lot of people love to give the heat, but they don't always have an answer for themselves. So, hope you enjoyed this, and definitely hit up in the comments. What bass players do you feel get a lot of heat and should have been on this list? Why do you think they get that heat? Let me know. Continue the conversation down below. Please like, subscribe, and share. It definitely helps out. And I will see you in the comments and on the next one. Thanks for watching.